Back with more of a Monday edition of Southern Fried Sports right here on Tide 1029 and 100.9 FM. Travis Reier of BamaOnline.com with you each and every weekday morning here on the radio station from 11 a.m. until noon. And as we go through the second half of today's program, wanted to get into some areas of this 2019 Alabama football team where you could see the Crimson Tide take a step backward, at least going into the season. We're going to talk about these. Now, as we move throughout the campaign, there's a good chance, as we've seen in most of Nick Saban's tenure in Tuscaloosa, these are areas where Alabama will not only become more than competitive, but perhaps rank as excellent in comparison to some other programs, not only around the Southeastern Conference, but all of college football as well. So, what we'll do in this segment is we'll go with some areas that you might see Alabama going into the season not rank as favorably as it has in some previous seasons. And we'll start on the offensive side of the ball, and we'll talk about first that offensive line. Now, when you lose the amount of starts, the experience that you had at two critical positions, the most critical positions of the offensive line, left tackle and the center spot. And with Jonah Williams moving on to the National Football League as a first round pick, Ross Pierce-Baker moving on to the National Football League as a mid-round pick, you're talking about a couple of guys that between them gave you a combined 7 seasons of starts. 3 for Jonah Williams, 4 for Ross Pierce-Baker. Now, Williams, as we know, opened his Alabama career as a right tackle, but for the last 2 seasons, he has manned that left tackle spot as well as anybody in the game. Ross Pierce-Baker, 3 years as a starter at the guard position, mostly at left guard. He did make a start at right guard, I believe, in the 2000 and what was it, 2017, somewhere around there. The opener against USC a couple, 3 years ago in Arlington, Texas. That's where we saw Ross Pierce-Baker make one of the rare starts at a spot other than left guard, and then last year, each and every game at the center position. So, in experience alone, you're taking a step back. Now, there are some pieces to this puzzle up front where you can make up for some of that. Specifically, a guy like Matt Womack, who started every game at right tackle 2 years ago, if he does, in fact, wind up at one of those guard positions. And we saw him at right guard for most of spring drills, although he did make a start in the A-Day game at right tackle with Jedrick Wills out with that ankle injury. So Matt Womack does sort of fill that gap from an experience standpoint if you choose to go that direction as the offensive line coach, first-year offensive line coach Kyle Flood. Otherwise, you talk about the tackle positions. Jedrick Wills, you feel really good about coming back in his second season as the starter at right tackle. Alex Leatherwood, as expected, moving out to the left tackle position. We saw Alex Leatherwood play at a high level in that 2018 national championship game against Georgia in place of Jonah Williams. Williams went out very early in that second half against the Dogs. Leatherwood admirably filled in for pretty much the entire second half there as Alabama came from behind and got the win in overtime. So the tackle spots, you're good there. Alex Leatherwood not going into the season, I'm not going to say he's a seamless transition from Jonah Williams. But again, a guy who, as he gets more and more comfortable, reacquainted with that spot after playing the right guard position a year ago, should be fine there. So the tackles you feel good about. The interior with the uncertainty involving Deonte Brown coming off the suspension for the college football playoff. Womack could perhaps fill that void for the time being. Center, is Chris Owens ready? Is he truly the guy at the center position after having Bradley Bozeman there for a couple seasons, followed by Ross Pierce-Baker? Left guard, Emil Ekiyor is the guy we saw for the most part in the spring working with the ones. You've got some solid depth there. Most of it, though, kind of like the guys that you're counting on to step into a couple of those starting roles, is unproven. Although you love Evan Neal, you love Darian Dalcourt, You love Pierce Quick. When you talk about 3 of those 4 early enrollees that we saw in spring drills, that makes you feel a lot better about the depth situation and the future of the position. Although, Evan Neal could easily be kicking back out to tackle in a year's time, depending on what happens with Jedrick Wills and Alex Leatherwood and the potential for the NFL draft in 2020 for both those guys. But Neal right now sort of cutting his teeth inside at 6'7", 6'8", just a incredible physical presence, but a guy who also showed you he can move pretty well at that size and around 350 pounds. So Evan Neal gives you depth in there. Deonte Brown, things could change a good bit once you get into October. I guess that's what we're saying first and foremost. Even late September, once you get through those first 4 games, Deonte Brown, how does he factor into this thing as you move into the midway point of the season and beyond? He's obviously a great talent, especially impactful in the run game. So you got some things to figure out there along that offensive line, and that will be a big part of the storylines in fall camp. Tight end is a part of that too. As an extension of the offensive line, we'll combine the tight end position with the offensive line. I think Miller Forrestall has a chance to be in that neighborhood of a 40 reception guy. With Irv Smith Jr. moving on to the National Football League, you got a really good inline type, an experienced guy in Hale Henches that you have to replace. So I would say tight end as an extension of the offensive line, perhaps even a bigger question mark than the OL. Once you get beyond Miller Forrestall, is Cameron Latou going to be the number 2 guy there? Kedrick James is suspended for the first 4 games of the season. You've got Major Tennyson in there. You got Jaleel Billingsley coming in as a true freshman. Michael Parker going into his second year in the program. More so than the top spot at tight end, I think your concerns are more so from a depth perspective. Let's move to another area of this Alabama offense. I'm going to give you the Alabama offensive backfield. I'm going to combine quarterback and running back in that together. And I know you look at Najee Harris, you look at Tua Tagovailoa, you look at Brian Robinson, and you think, well, that doesn't look like much of a weakness to me. Well, in comparison to the last few years, when Alabama just had incredibly unique, I guess you could call it, depth at quarterback and running back, it certainly is different. Damian Harris is gone. Josh Jacobs and his versatility's gone. I think Najee Harris and Brian Robinson, when you talk about the ability to pound on people and grind out yards, you're going to be good there. You're going to be good there with a couple of 225-pound backs. But you're going to need a little something different, like Josh Jacobs gave you, even Damian Harris to an extent. And that's where Trey Sanders, the 5-star running back coming in, is going to be counted upon, I think, to at least compete with Jerome Ford for that sort of role. More of a open field guy, but can run with power if needed, can catch the football out of the backfield. Just a little bit of a different look from Brian Robinson and Najee Harris. I think Harris and Robinson have a chance to be a hellacious 1-2 punch, but I think Trey Sanders almost has to provide something just in terms of, again, being a little bit different than Harris and Robinson. And Jerome Ford, I don't think you can count him out from that standpoint either. Chadarius Townsend, we saw at running back in the spring, gave the Alabama offense a little bit of a different look, sort of like a Kenyon Drake from a few years ago. So that'll be interesting to watch play out. And you combine that with the quarterback position, to have the quarterback situation Alabama had the last 2 years, that's totally uncommon, and especially uncommon moving forward. With all the quarterback movement you're seeing via the transfer portal in college football right now, it's hard to maintain a roster of much quality and certainly experience. As talented as Jalen Hurts is, what he gave you a year ago with those 2 years of starts, that's just not the norm at all. And so that moves on. And now you're looking at a situation with Mac Jones, Talia Tagovailoa, Paul Tyson to support Tua Tagovailoa. And you look at this Alabama schedule and you say, look, any of those 4 guys have a chance to run the table against this schedule. And that may be true. I'm not as sure about going on the road in some situations like A&M and Auburn down the road with one of those other three quarterbacks at the spot. But everywhere else around the quarterback position, we know running back, wide receiver, again, even with Forrestall likely to step into that number one role at tight end, going to have plenty of support to buoy that next quarterback if it comes down to it. But if you get into sort of a national quarterfinal situation with, say, Georgia and Atlanta, you got to have Tua Tagovailoa. So, not having that luxury that really no one else in college football has had the last couple of years, not to the extent of Alabama anyway. You've had some talented 1-2 punches the last couple of years, whether it was Jake Fromm and Jacob Eason at Georgia a couple seasons ago. Last year you had Fromm and Justin Fields at Georgia. But when you talk about the combination of talent and big game experience, no one has had it really to the extent of Alabama the last couple of years. So I include the quarterback situation in that as well. And our final area that we'll look to in terms of an area where at least early in the season, Alabama may be encountering a step back of sorts, it's got to be inside linebacker. I got to think. I mean, and not only because there's total unproven candidates at that spot opposite Dylan Moses, since you lose a monster in Quinnen Williams right in front of those inside linebackers. Although DJ Dale showed some very promising things in the spring as an early enrollee, you wonder about your ability to protect those inside linebackers. Now, Raekwon Davis is going to be able to give you some of that. Fedarian Mathis should be able to give you some of that. You're going to have LeBrian Ray at the end position. You've got this plethora of ultra-talented defensive line signees that includes Dale, Justin Aboigbe, Antonio Alfano. You have three more that have made their way to Tuscaloosa since the end of spring drill. So, that should work itself out just fine. But inside linebacker, other than Dylan Moses, Josh McMillan, is he more than a serviceable sort of backup? Is he really ready to step into that role as not an every down guy, because that's going to be Dylan Moses, but you're still going to need a base and nickel option to go with Moses. Is that Josh McMillan? Could Shane Lee continue on his ascent that we saw as an early enrollee back in March and April? Markel Benton is in that mix. What about the second-year guys? Is Jalen Moody, Ali Cahoe, are they ready to take that next step forward? Yeah, and we're just talking about finding a starter to go along with Dylan Moses. God forbid something happens to Dylan Moses, and now you've got to have two of these guys fill those important roles, and one of those being the every down inside guy. Although if it came down to not having Moses, perhaps Pete Golding would be forced to go with sort of a combination of a base and nickel guy and then a dime option if it came down to it. So those would be three areas that I would point to at least early in the 2019 season that could be considered spots where Alabama takes a bit of a step back from a year ago. When we come back on Southern Fried Sports, we'll talk about three areas where Alabama might very well be improved over where it was a year ago. We'll do that and more when Southern Fried Sports returns, presented by Peterbrook Chocolatier on Tide 102.9 and 100.9 FM right after this.